Okay, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining the first learning session of Mongolian Evaluation Association for the year 2023. We are very much honored and excited to have Dr. Quinn Patton and Ms. Charmagne Patton as our speakers to kick off this year's learning session series. My name is Ertin Çimik Ultisisureng. I'm a founder and president of Mongolian Evaluation Association. I met Dr. Quinn Patton last year in November at the American Evaluation Association's annual conference in New Orleans, USA. When I saw him in person at the conference, I immediately approached him to meet because he was my teacher and mentor of evaluation practice during the 3 years of COVID lockdown online, which he did not know, of course. Literally, I watched and listened to all his webinars and talks and read his guidelines and open source materials regarding evaluation. I'm sure there are thousands of people who, like me, who have learned and benefited so much from Dr. Quinn Patton and admire his works and legacy. I also met Ms. Charmagne, his daughter and business partner, at a different occasion of the conference in New Orleans, because I already got to know her again through her Blue Marble Evaluation webinar series, which I attend virtually. I asked both if they could share their knowledge and expertise of evaluation at Mongolian Evaluation Association's learning session. And to my surprise, they both agreed kindly, which is a living proof of their heart and passion to pass the legacy of evaluation practice to young and emerging evaluators, despite their competing priorities and commitments. So Dr. Quinn Patton has published numerous books on evaluation topics such as Utilization-Focused Evaluation, Principle-Focused Evaluation, Blue Marble Evaluation, among others. So here I invite Dr. Quinn Patton and Ms. Charmagne Patton to the floor to give us the presentation. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much. We are very honored to be participating in this learning session with you. It is an honor to be able to share what we have learned over these 50 years. We'll do a bit of the history and then extract some lessons that we would like to share in the context of the emergence of the Mongolian Evaluation Association. The first edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation came out in 1978, and there have been 5 editions since then, about one new edition every 10 years, and the field has changed a great deal over that period of time, but the overarching principle has remained the same: to focus on intended use, by and with intended users in every aspect of and at every stage of an evaluation. Utilization-focused evaluation begins with the premise that evaluations should be judged by their utility and actual use, and evaluators should facilitate the evaluation design and every aspect of evaluation with careful consideration of everything that will be done from beginning to end, how that will affect use. That's the basic premise of utilization-focused evaluation, is to think about how what we do will affect who will use the evaluation and how it will be used. That seems simple in theory, but it turns out to be very challenging in practice, because it means we have to be clear about who an evaluation is for and how it can be used. And there are many different people who might be users of evaluation, and there are many different kinds of evaluation, many different purposes and uses. And so part of the challenge is to be clear for any given evaluation who it's for and how it's going to be used. It was that work with use that led to developmental evaluation that focused on how to evaluate innovations, which led to principles-focused evaluation about how to evaluate under conditions of rapid change and complexity, and then to blue marble evaluation, which is about how the global scene, our global interactions, things like the pandemic, our international community effects evaluation. The blue marble refers to the iconic image of the Earth taken from space, that first space shot in 1972 in the last Apollo mission. And that is a picture of our Earth, our shared home, without national borders, without divisions, one humanity. And that's where we are today in thinking about global evaluation. It actually takes 5 different outer space photos of the Earth to capture the entire globe, to see all of the continents and all of the Earth. And so from blue marble evaluation, we have arrived, beginning with utilization-focused evaluation, focused on use, to innovation, to complexity, and now to global evaluation. And so we're going to begin by talking about the ways in which throughout all of that, there's certain principles and lessons that we think are especially important at that. And Charmagne is going to begin with the first of these lessons.
Greetings, great to be with you all. I don't know if you, Michael, if you want to stop share and try and reshare, because we are seeing your notes pages. It's up to you if you want to try to share the presenter view.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll start talking about the lesson. So you saw, I believe, the first evaluation lesson that we wanted to share is that context matters and culture matters. And this really comes from the first operating principle of utilization-focused evaluation, which is to understand and take into account the situation in which evaluation will occur. And so you can go to the next slide. That really calls us to contextualize our evaluation within whatever context we're working. And we like to use the example of Minnesota. Michael and I are joining you today from Minnesota, which is right in the north central part of the United States. And Minnesota is referred to as the land of 10,000 lakes. There is a significant population of fishers here, people who fish, whether in the summer or in the winter. There's ice fishing as well. And so if we start an evaluation workshop here in Minnesota, one of the things that we can do is to connect evaluation to fishing, to try to really make it relevant to people here. So if you want to ask a question about desired outcomes, you can talk about, is it just to catch fish? What if you don't catch any fish? Does spending time outdoors with family or friends also count as an outcome? Or suppose you do catch fish, does it matter what kind of fish or how many? Most people might be looking for northern pike or walleyes unless you're out bass fishing. So you have to really pay attention to what you're catching. Some fish you are legally required to catch and release, and other fish you are allowed to keep. But there's a limit if you have a fishing permit. And how you fish is also important. So what kind of bait and equipment that you use. And so the process matters, you know, whether the weather is good and where you're fishing. And so it's really about matching the right equipment to the right situation. So we can get into a conversation with the folks that we are working with about the parallels between outcomes and process of fishing compared to outcomes and processes of a program that they might be implementing. The success criteria whether you're trying to get fish or whether you're trying to, you know, engage with family. So it's a great way to get a metaphor about how you can connect evaluation to people's real life experiences and really make it something that they can really think about in their own lives. And so if we move on to the global principle, the other piece that we layer on top of contextualizing the evaluation comes from Blue Marble evaluation. There's a set of 16 principles for Blue Marble evaluation. And one of them, the sixth there you'll see, is the global principle, which calls us to integrate complex interactions across levels, which means local, global, connected. So we think globally, act locally, and evaluate the interactions. And so you can see the really deep importance of what's happening at the local level with the fishing in the lakes and, you know, the culture surrounding that, as well as the global level. So thinking about moving from evaluating fishing to evaluating the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem. And what would that look like? So actually thinking about the health of the lakes and rivers in which you're fishing, how they're connected to other bodies of water, how climate change might be impacting them, how potentially international treaties around climate and water safety and all of those things play into fishing at the local level, something that we may not always think about in our day-to-day or when designing programs, but that is really important, particularly in the world that we're living in, to make those global to local connections to really understand how we can impact our local environment within a global context. The other piece that's really important to take into account, returning to that local level, is to consider the culture and history of the land where these fish are being caught. So Minnesota is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the indigenous Dakota and Ojibwe people. And where I sit, I'm just a few miles away from the confluence of the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers, which is a place known by the Dakota as Bedote. And many people consider this a sacred location, a place of creation. And treaty rights and native sovereignty have to be understood when we're talking about fishing in Minnesota as well. In the 19th century, land cessation treaties focused on giving Indian nations, while they gave up their right to land, they did not give up their right to hunt or fish on that land in traditional ways. And so Indian treaty rights are recognized under the US Constitution, and the federal courts continue to uphold those legal rights. So they are not bound to the same laws about how many fish and what kind of fish they're allowed to catch. And that's important to take into context. And then we can also zoom back out to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People to consider how that plays in. We also wanted to share the Ojibwe medicine wheel, as there are some connections between that and some of the values that appear on the Mongolian flag, which we'll talk about later. But this is really the circle of life, symbolizing the natural cycles of birth, growth, death, and regeneration, just like the cycle life of a plant beginning with a seed. So we look at the 4 points of the circle viewed clockwise: air, fire, water, and earth. So just really bringing that cultural awareness into everything we do is really important as we also think about the context. And I'll pass it back to Michael to talk a little bit more about culturally responsive evaluation and how that fits into our work.
So the importance of context and culture is one of the major lessons of evaluation, adapting evaluation to local, cultural, and situational context, taking advantage of culture, honoring culture. Dr. Stafford Hood, the founder of Culturally Responsive Evaluation, passed away in January, and we want to honor his contributions to this work. But throughout the evaluation process, being responsive to culture has become a global pattern. For example, matching the evaluation design to the evaluation's purpose, resources, and timelines to optimize use within its cultural, political, economic, and social context. Includes attention and sensitivity to culture. There's a issue of New Directions for Evaluation, our major journal, about the importance of context, diverse people, diverse perspectives, diverse processes, diverse outcomes. And so there are a lot of options in evaluation, and being aware of how people and use intersects with context is one of those enduring issues. And it's become important globally. For example, in the African Evaluation Association, there's a major effort to focus on made in Africa evaluation, the ways in which evaluation can be especially adapted to an African context. The African Evaluation Association meetings have given special attention to made in Africa. For example, incorporating the principle of Ubuntu from Southern Africa, the principle of interpersonal interaction that pervades sub-Saharan Africa. A person is a person through other people. I am because you are. In the West, in North America and Europe, they're highly individualized cultures. The data in evaluation is often highly individualized data, gathering data from individuals about individual changes. But the African context pays more attention to community. In the Ubuntu spirit, Bishop Desmond Tutu explains, my humanity is caught up and is inextricably bound up in yours. I'm human because I belong. The principle of Ubuntu means wholeness. It is knowledge that we belong to a greater whole and are diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed, or treated as if they were less than who they are. Our purpose is social and community harmony and well-being. The African evaluation context then emphasizes community and relationship. The very latest issue of New Directions for Evaluation that just came out includes a chapter on Made in Africa evaluation, understanding indigenous approaches to Africa and evaluation through proverbs. That article says the communitarian ethic of indigenous African people can inspire and guide committed evaluators to respect and engage representatives of stakeholder groups in co-design and co-execution of evaluations, meaning making evaluation a community, a shared community activity. And the article says, imagine an evaluation rooted in the wisdom of Swahili proverbs by reflecting on the question, how will the practice of evaluation look if informed, inspired, and guided by wisdom found in Swahili proverbs? I lived in Africa for 2 years in Burkina Faso, and one of the proverbs there was Kigali Senkuli being Nulad Galimi, which says, if the stream zigzags, the crocodile has to zigzag. For evaluation, this is about adaptation. As conditions change, as the challenges change, one of the lessons we're going to talk about more later is the importance of adaptation. And so the proverb, if the stream zigzags, the crocodile has to zigzag. And so we looked at some Mongolian proverbs. We clearly are new and just learning about Mongolian culture. And so our interpretation of Mongolian proverbs may not be accurate, may not be what it would mean within your culture, but we found it stimulating and evocative and fun to think about the meaning for evaluation of some Mongolian proverbs. For example, you can't put two saddles on the same horse. I love that proverb because one of the issues in evaluation is trying to do too many different kinds of evaluation, too many different purposes of evaluation in one evaluation. Utilization-focused evaluation is about being focused, being clear about a major and primary purpose. And you can't put two saddles on the same horse. You can't do many different purposes of evaluation in a single evaluation. It needs to be focused. Times are not always the same. The grass is not always green. This proverb tells us that conditions change and that we have to adapt to different kinds of conditions. I love this proverb. One idiot can ask more questions than 10 wise men can answer. That reminds us of the importance of being very thoughtful about the questions we ask. Evaluation begins with questions. What are the questions that we're going to answer in the evaluation? And we need to be thoughtful about answering meaningful questions, questions that are relevant, questions that will be useful. It is easier to catch an escaped horse than to take back an escaped word. We have found that language is very important in evaluation. The jargon of evaluation can be off-putting. It may not be clear to people who we work with, ordinary people, about what evaluation means. Sometimes we can appear to be insulting to people by using the wrong language. And so we've had volumes of new directions for evaluation about how language matters, how we talk about evaluation, how we find the words that will be meaningful and helpful rather than make people feel like they don't understand what's happening. And if you want to build high, you must dig deep. This calls our attention to the foundations of evaluation, that one of the mistakes we find people make is they rush into methods and methodology and measuring things before building a foundation of use, of relationships, of what the purpose of the evaluation is for and who it is. And that is what, for me, represents digging deep, is being sure that the evaluation is based in a solid foundation of use and relationships that we can build from. Three more Mongolian proverbs that we found and we find are thoughtful for evaluation. Wise men talk about ideas, intellectuals about facts, and the ordinary man talks about what he eats. This is a reminder that our evaluations to serve ordinary people must be about the things that they care about. I love this proverb because evaluation, as it has grown, has lots of jargon, has lots of concepts, is a profession and a science, but ultimately we need to be able to relate to ordinary people, the things that they're concerned about. A cat likes to eat fresh fish, but it will not go into the water. This proverb reminds us that we can't just sit in our offices and do evaluation. I do, and Charmagne does, we do a lot of qualitative evaluation, which means going out into the field, going out where people are, going out where the programs are, going out to where action is. Evaluators who simply send out surveys, but never go into the field and never visit the people and never see what's happening in the rural areas and in the places where programs go on, are missing a lot of information. And so we have to go out into the place where programs are. And finally, this very provocative Mongolian proverb, a meat-eating biting tooth is in the mouth, the man-biting tooth is in the soul. I'll be interested in having conversations with you about the meaning of these proverbs from your point of view. But what this evokes for us is the importance of both dealing with the basic needs of people in programs, but also their emotional needs and their spiritual needs, which is what the Native American medicine wheel that Charmagne shared with you has a attention both to the physical needs of people, the intellectual and learning needs, but also their emotional and spiritual needs. And so one of the lessons of contextualization is to draw upon indigenous wisdom, local wisdom, things that people know, and connect evaluation to that and use that to inform our evaluations. We are moving into and have moved to the 21st century as what's now being called the Asian century because of the projected dominance of Asian economies, politics, and culture. And so when I had the opportunity to help keynote the launch of the Asian Journal of Evaluation, I raised the question of what will Made in Asia evaluation look like and Made in Mongolia evaluation look like as we move into this new century globally. And so an example of contextualization in our Blue Marble team in Japan, we looked at some of the words in Japan that have special meaning for evaluation. For example, the Japanese word kaizen is a philosophy of continuous improvement, becoming 1% better every day. A kaizen is a way of relating evaluation to an important Japanese word. Another Japanese phrase, shikata ganai, means it cannot be helped. A major thrust of utilization-focused evaluation is identified through a situation analysis and systems understanding what is actionable, what is not, what can be changed, what cannot be changed. Situation analysis calls for the examination of the nature of a problem, its sources, its history, and what aspects of the problem are amenable to change, and what cannot be changed. For example, in international development projects, it takes place in a mountainous terrain where transportation is difficult, the environment is harsh, and is turbulent, will have to accept these conditions. The terrain is the terrain. So social innovators must adapt to the terrain because the mountain will continue to be the mountain. Successful social innovations focus on those things that are doable, and developmental evaluations provide actionable recommendations that are feasible and useful within a particular context. This is the spirit of what's come to be known as the serenity prayer. Grant the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Evaluation situation analysis can help in distinguishing the difference. What can be changed? What cannot be changed? How do we know what can be changed? And evaluation helps inform that. And the Japanese phrase evokes that understanding. And so we wanted to think about it and invite the Mongolian Evaluation Association to draw upon the values and the meanings of your own culture, not just for Mongolian evaluation, but so that as part of the global community, we look forward to learning from you. We appreciate this opportunity to share with you some of what we've learned, but we are also very interested in learning how you come to evaluation, how you adapt your own values and culture and history to evaluation. We think you have a great deal to offer us. The values that are embedded in the symbols of Mongolia have universal meaning. And some of what it means for us, Charmagne mentioned earlier, the importance of fire in the Native American medicine wheel. And throughout history, fire has represented technology, the discovery of fire by human beings, the use of fire, the new ways of doing things. That becomes an evaluation issue. The importance of the sun is about how we illuminate things. The moon represents reflection. The earth represents sustainability. And the water is essential for life. Looking at these values, because the word value is in the middle of evaluation, that we are stimulated by the values that are encompassed in the symbols of Mongolia to help us reflect upon how evaluation addresses these. And particularly exciting to me and to Charmagne was to find the symbol that we call the yin-yang symbol into the flag and the symbols of Mongolia. I'm not sure that pronounce this right, Tejitu, is a very important symbol in blue marble evaluation. So that we have in blue marble evaluation, one of the principles Charmaine shared with you earlier the principle of global, there is a yin-yang principle in Blue Marble evaluation to harmonize conceptual opposites. What Western evaluation does is tend to see things in conflict, and what we learn from the yin-yang principle is to understand these things in relationship to each other, so that instead of seeing them in conflict, we can see how one illuminates the other. Balancing different purposes, accountability and learning, proving effectiveness, improving programs. These are often treated as opposites in Western evaluation, but yin-yang invites us to look at how they relate together. And so there are a number of these issues in evaluation that we think the understandings and the spirit of a yin-yang conceptualization and approach may help us deal with these different kinds of emphases in evaluation, between evaluation independence and interdependence, between evaluators being in control and collaborative and participatory evaluation approaches, between journalizing findings across programs to contextualizing findings within a particular setting, evaluators as neutral versus evaluators as having skin in the game. What we mean by skin in the game is having a stake in the outcomes of the program. Evaluators as rendering judgment versus bringing multiple perspectives to bear, not just the evaluator's perspective, but reporting other perspectives. And a project focus versus a systems change focus. These are all issues and tensions within the field of evaluation that a yin-yang understanding may help us negotiate going forward, and the local and global connections that Charmaine began with. And so as we think about not just projects, but systems change, zooming out to the big picture, the global picture, and zooming into local context, looking long-term, medium-term, and short-term, integrating these things into the future of evaluation. So that's the lesson of contextualizing. And we've tried to think about how we view that from our cultural perspective, and we look forward to learning from you how these meanings can inform global evaluation from a Mongolian context. The second lesson we want to cover is about the personal factor, and Charmaine's going to pick up on that.
Yeah, so our second lesson is that people matter. Obviously, people connect to the context and the culture as well, but in particular, the personal factor is calling us to identify and engage with the primary intended users of the evaluation. And the personal factor was one of the original pieces of utilization-focused evaluation that Michael came up with in 1978 in the first edition of utilization-focused evaluation. And we define the personal factor as the presence of an identifiable individual or group of people who personally care about the evaluation and the findings that it generates. And we have a quote here from that edition: the effect of individual people in a system where individuals are supposed to be interchangeable in organizational roles and positions, but where they aren't interchangeable at all, that it really does matter who is using this. So we the language really changes from audiences and then stakeholders to actually primary intended users. And the differences there around not just passively accepting or receiving information, not just even having a stake in what the outcomes are, but actually planning to use the information for something specific that they're trying to do. And so when we work to honor that personal factor, we have to identify and engage primary intended users. And we're really looking for people who are interested in being involved, people who are knowledgeable about the program and the evaluation needs, as well as the context and culture. open to evaluation and the process of learning and improvement, that they're connected to other important stakeholders and constituencies, that they have credibility in the eyes of other key stakeholders and users. They're teachable about utilization-focused evaluation, and they're committed and available for interaction throughout the evaluation process. So what we have really learned over years of research and practice confirms that this is really important in terms of getting information that we gather used and making sure that it's useful. And so we really try to engage primary intended users in the possibilities around evaluation to help make sure that we can honor diverse perspectives and stories. So I'm going to pass it back to Michael to share a story that he found that he would like to use.
Well, we became interested in looking at Mongolian culture, the different stories that are part of your culture. One series of stories about the epics of King Gazar, and we're impressed, as is true in African stories and in other cultures and Native American stories, in Western stories, that in these oral traditions, there's often different versions of the same story, that different people telling the story change parts of it. And it reminds us then of the importance of multiple perspectives. Traditionally, evaluation and evaluators were expected to render a singular judgment, to come up with the right answer. But what we find is that the different perspectives that people bring, the different ways they tell their stories, become important. And the upcoming evaluation conference this year for the American Evaluation Association, the theme is the power of story. And one of the things that we have done over the years is collect stories from different cultures to share and to think about their meaning. Because I find that every fairy tale, every cultural story, every creation myth has evaluation implications, has ways of helping us think about evaluation. And so let me share an example of what we found is a Mongolian story that I find teaches us a lot about evaluation. Again, we are new to your culture. We're just learning about it, and we're anxious to learn more about it. But I came across the story of the hungry wolf and muddy horse. A hungry wolf came aboard a horse stuck in the mud. He moved in to eat the horse, but the horse said, "Dear wolf, if you want to eat me, first take me out of the mud and then eat me." The wolf accepted the request of the horse and took the horse out of the mud. The horse said, "If you want to eat me, first clean the mud off me." As the horse had requested, the wolf cleaned the horse by licking the mud and then tried to eat him. But the horse said, "There's a letter in my hind hoof. Please read it first and then you can eat me." The wolf went to the hind feet of the horse to look for the letter, but instead the horse kicked the wolf hard and ran away. As the wolf awoke from the blow, he reflected, "Why did I let that happen? Why did I take the horse out of the mud? Am I the owner of the horse? Why did I lick the mud off the horse? Am I the mother of the horse? Why did I try to read the letter in the hoof? Am I literate? Why did I let that happen?" These are evaluation questions. These represent the kind of questions that programs ask. What happened? Why did we do what we did? What did each of those things mean? And each of the interactions between the wolf and the horse actually has evaluation metaphors and analogies to it. And so that's part of what is meant by being able to connect with local culture through an evaluation lens and give it meaning. Given the shortness of time, we're just going to very briefly mention the other letters, the other lessons. I think turn to our closing here. We wanted to talk about the way in which being involved in evaluations can affect people, what is called process use. And Charmagne will say a few words about this, and then we'll move to our conclusion, so we have time for some interactions.
Yeah, so our third lesson is about how being involved in evaluation has the potential to change people. And so process use was really one of the ideas that came through the third edition of utilization-focused evaluation, and is one of our operating principles to facilitate process use with intentionality, being aware of and strategic about how being involved in the evaluation affects those involved. So we really are trying to actually intentionally think about how the evaluation is going to affect people who are involved in the evaluation. And that includes things like setting evaluation priorities, clarifying goals, conceptualizing the program's logic model, improving the program's outcomes, measurement, evaluative thinking, learning, enhanced evaluation capacity, and integrating evaluation into the program. So often people are not looking for process use. People are just looking for the outcomes of an evaluation. But what we find is that process use can sometimes be even more powerful, because it really can change the way that people are interacting and change organizational culture. And so that is why we focus on process use as a third lesson, to really acknowledge that evaluation can and has the potential to change people. Should we move on to the fourth lesson? All right, so go ahead.
Go ahead. So
evaluation can and should be adapted to changing context. So that is our fourth lesson. And this is, Michael already mentioned with the Burkina Faso metaphor around zigzagging, that adaptation is really so important as things are changing, and in our current reality, things are changing rapidly. And so when the context for an evaluation changes, the evaluation also has to change. And so we include that into our design and contract language. We make sure that we're paying attention to patterns and trends that can affect evaluation, and make sure that we're open as evaluators to change, and try to facilitate a sense of openness and willingness to change among those that we work with, so that we make sure that there isn't a roadblock to that. Like we already said, we were going to do it, we have to do it this way. We really try to encourage that openness and flexibility to ensure adaptation can happen.
So part of the current adaptation is our going back to the global context, what's now being called a polycrisis. The crisis of the coronavirus, the crisis of misinformation on social media, economic turbulence, the climate change emergency, issues around social justice and equity, the sustainable development goals, all of these things coming together in what's now being called a polycrisis. And that has led to calls for transformation, so that we're increasingly now not just looking at project evaluation and program evaluation, but systems change to make systems more sustainable, regenerative, dealing with the climate emergency, making health systems more effective, educational systems more effective, viewing things through a systems lens, and engaging with transformation. One of the Blue Marble evaluation principles is transformative engagement. Engage and evaluate consistent with the magnitude, direction, and speed of transformations needed. And so evaluation then operates at a local project level with very direct programs, but is also increasingly involved with looking at transformation of food and agriculture systems. Last year was United Nations Food Systems Summit that looked at and is still working on global transformation. That is the leading edge of evaluation. And so we must transform evaluation to evaluate transformation. The field has been looking at these issues. The 2014 conference of the American Evaluation Association had its theme, Visionary Evaluation for a Sustainable, Equitable Future. The Australasian Evaluation Society in 2018 conference theme was Transformations. The European Evaluation Conference theme in 2018 was Evaluation for More Resilient Societies. The International Development Evaluation Association last face-to-face meeting in 2019 was Evaluation for Transformational Change. This past year, the European Association's meeting was Evaluation at a Watershed. actions and shifting paradigms for challenging times, recognizing the global challenges that we face going forward. And so we've moved from where evaluation began 50 years ago with just looking at goals and goal attainment to then introducing logic models and then introducing theories of change. And now we're dealing with theories of transformation and how does transformation come about. And in that context, we think that you have things that we can learn from out of your own history and culture and traditions that are Mongolian insights into the nature of transformation. The conjunction of heaven and earth gives rise to the 10,000 things, the state of multiplicity. The 10,000 things are born by transformation. This notion of transformation in a yin-yang context is one of the issues that we're all going to be facing worldwide in the context of the polycrisis and global emergencies. And we look forward to learning from you about what a state of multiplicity can be, how evaluation can be innovative, and how we as a worldwide community can draw upon your wisdom and knowledge about transformation. And so we've talked about the importance of context and culture, the personal factor that people matter, how being involved in an evaluation can change people through what's called process use, not just findings use, how evaluation can and should be adapted to changing context, how we need to transform evaluation to evaluate transformation. And we want to close with the importance of intergenerational perspectives to add value. Charmaine?
Yeah, so we've been talking in Blue Marble evaluation and in connection with our friends at Eval Youth about the importance of intergenerational evaluation, a vision of evaluation that's grounded in the work of the field's founders, while deepened, refreshed, and adapted for young and emergent, more diverse new generations of evaluators. And as a practice, we have two generations. Michael is my father, and we try to bring others into our fold who offer different perspectives, both culturally and generationally. And we're excited that you all launched your Eval Youth Mongolia chapter just a few weeks back and want to offer our congratulations on that. And look forward to connecting and collaborating with you all. We want to thank you for inviting us to be part of this learning series and want to open it up for questions or comments. We have got about 13 minutes left, I think, in the hour, and happy to respond to anything you all have to say.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Quinn Patton and Ms. Charmagne Patton, for your so wonderful and rich presentation for us. And we have really truly traveled through the evolution of evaluation. In particular, I really appreciate that you studied our culture, our proverbs, fairy tales, and linking them to the evaluation. It's so creative, and I really appreciate that you put so much efforts and time into make this presentation so live and interlink it with our culture. And also we hope that Mongolians can contribute to the scholarship of evaluation and to the betterment of society with you all and as an intergenerational community of evaluators from Mongolia. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ganzoruk, who is our board member, and he will facilitate the Q&A session. And thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good. So thank you very much, Mr. Michael Quinn Patton. It was very nice and wonderful presentation. And I would like to start the question and answer session. And before the session, I prepared some questions while you were presenting, and maybe I can ask the first question by myself. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it was very interesting presentation, and I had some questions. The first question was what are the main issues for developing countries like Mongolia comparing to developed countries like US?
It's a really great question, and it's something that we're all learning about. It turns out that the United States has and the Western countries have the problem of overusing resources, of too much consumption, of creating the issues of climate change. And so part of, I think, the way I would reframe the question in some ways is that we're in a global situation where the negotiations between countries that are more developing and the industrialized countries is finding a better balance on the global scale between our use of resources, that we need to, in fact, a big part of what's happening in efforts toward making the Western countries more sustainable is looking at indigenous practices in countries that have used their resources more wisely, that have not become industrialized, that are not polluting, that are not creating all of the gases in climate change, the methane and the carbon, and that we actually, as industrialized countries, now need to learn from the countries like Mongolia that is at a lower level of consumption, better use of resources, is more in touch directly with the land, and so in a way, the industrialized countries are presenting the problem, and we need help in finding the solutions from the wisdom of local and indigenous cultures that are closer to their environments. Charmaine, do you want to add anything?
I would just say that from an international development standpoint, there's been so much evaluation requirements that often don't make sense to the context and the culture. We've worked with the World Bank and the United Nations to try to get them to understand the importance of some of these lessons that we shared with you today, and it's still a work in progress, but I think continuing to push for evaluation that is appropriate to the context and culture is something that is going to continue to be really important, particularly in Mongolia and other developing contexts, where they may, be enforcing a different standard of evaluation that makes sense. And so, that will be an ongoing struggle probably, but also something that we are working for too and support, and any way that we can continue to change the narrative around that, we will do that.
Okay, thank you for the answers. It's kind of making sense that the developed countries like US is having too much consumption of natural resources and some issues with the sustainability issues compared to the developing countries like Mongolia. But I was thinking, because it's already many years of evaluation developed and the high level of usage of evaluation in any aspects of development projects and policies in America, in developed countries, than the countries like Mongolia. Because the problem now in Mongolia, for evaluation field, we are facing is only talking about the principles, for example, and some methodologies and some very initially stages of discussions ongoing, instead of very high level of discussions like theory of change or transformational change, and things are very, I think, high level. So just for my second question, the question is that how should we advocate the importance of evaluation for the stakeholders country-wise, including all levels of policymakers? Because it seems like very difficult in Mongolia to persuade that the evaluation is very important, and the good sounded practical evaluation should be done, and for further development of Mongolia, and also evaluating all the projects and policies. But the problem is that the stakeholders, they don't really understand or think that it's very important, the evaluation is.
Well, we actually have the same problem in the US and in the West, is that politicians want to do what politicians want to do. They don't want to look at evidence. We've got the very bad example of Donald Trump, who could not be less interested in any facts or any evidence, and because of the ideology and the politics at the national level, we have great difficulty getting evaluation used, and we have a substantial part of the population that is becoming even more anti-science. The people who don't believe in vaccinations, the people who don't believe in studying the real history of the United States and don't want to deal with the realities of things like slavery and the ways in which the imperialism of the West has affected the world. So it's a universal problem. We actually, Charmaine and I, deal much more at a local level, where we try to find examples for people where they have learned in the past of things that work and don't work, so that to make it meaningful to stakeholders, what we try to look for are examples that are meaningful to people about things that are meaningful knowledge and learning that they themselves have come through, and that the vaccinations, the COVID, the importance of responding to that based on science and knowledge, the different things that were tried out in COVID, we're still learning from those things. The things that we've learned about education and health. It's an ongoing struggle, and I find that the way to try to get to policymakers is to look for examples that you can share about something that people used to believe that turned out not to be true, and that we now know that we need to do things differently, and that whoever we're talking to, a particular policymaker, what's something that they have learned, what's something that they recognize that there is learning involved, and that evaluation can contribute to that. So it becomes, that's what the personal factor is about, how we connect with individuals about learning possibilities. But we haven't solved that problem in the West at all. We still have lots of resistance.
Okay, thank you, Charmaine. Charmaine, do you want to add, or we can move on?
No, I would just say, yeah, sometimes it's taking the word evaluation out of it altogether. If that seems to be a trigger too, is to think about how do you embed it in what's already being done, find examples where it can be kind of done without it being as obvious, and then show the results of that and show that it's useful, and then build upon that.
Yeah, what I understood from the website of your American Evaluation Association is that very active and lots of content and lots of activities ongoing in America. I thought like it's very active, and I thought like the awareness of the importance is very much understood by the public, and lots of active people wants to raise their hands to improve the evaluation. And but maybe it's because the number issue that Mongolia is anyway having very few number of people, and America is a huge country. That's why maybe everywhere there is some branch of evaluation association and doing like topical interest groups and things are very active. Okay, so I will move to the next to the audience, and if anyone wants to ask question or saying comments, please go ahead.
Brenda, may I?
Yes, please.
Okay. Actually, I have a lot of questions, but I understand we have a limited time. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. So my name is Mandy, and I have two hats, the regular member, and also I'm in chair for the TIG for organization evaluation and the system evaluation. So may I have two questions as a regular member? Okay, so first, like, what was the best evaluation you have ever made, which is so memorable and remarkable, and why? Can I ask?
This takes us back in history. We had a situation when in the 1970s and 1980s where there were really no programs for helping women who were victims of violence and domestic abuse. And the laws and the efforts to support that unfortunate condition, they were just beginning to be what are called battered women's shelters, places where women could go with their children when they were victims of abuse. And we had a senator from Minnesota who was working on those issues, and his wife, and she asked us to do an evaluation of that situation. And what they found was that what we found in interviewing women was that when they this again is before mobile phones, this is before the internet, that when a woman would be able to get away from an abusive situation and get to a payphone where you had to have a dime to make a call, and she would call for help, and they would tell her that there were no beds available and that she would be put on a waiting list to get help. Well, and then she had no place to go but back to the situation that she was in, or she would become homeless. When we reported those findings, they made such an impact on the senator and upon the people who were dealing with these issues that they made a policy that anytime a woman called and said that she was a victim of abuse and her children, that they would never say there are no beds. They would immediately arrange to go and pick her up wherever she was. She had done her part, she had called, and if there were no beds, they would take her to a hotel or they would take her to somebody's house. And they created a system for the first time of making sure that every woman who needed help got help, that they were never put on a waiting list. They never got a busy signal. They never got put on a hold on the phone, but that was recognized as a true emergency. And that evaluation created an entire system of supporting women in domestic abuse that had not existed before. It increased the number of beds, it increased the facilities, and it had a major impact upon that entire arena by showing what the impacts were of how the current system worked. So it was, to your point, not just an evaluation of the shelters, but it was a systems change, changing how the entire system responded to the problem of domestic abuse.
Very nice. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And we probably need to arrange another session where we can just answer your questions. We're sorry that we spent so much time presenting that we don't get much time for interaction. So we would certainly be willing to have another session that's just dialogue and interaction, because we love to talk with you more and learn from you about what you're doing.
Thank you. I think I should leave. If anyone have no question, then I can continue, but I need to ask.
Well, go ahead and ask your second question. Go ahead.
Okay. So
You already.
I'm working in a donor organization, the USA, one of in the project, Mongolian project. And so did you have the experiences? I think you already have done that. For example, the US Congress is adopting some kind of the grants to the developing countries, right? Did you have the involvement to evaluate the grant effectiveness and efficiency, like from the Congress side?
So it's the problem with international evaluation of aid is that it's become very bureaucratic and very much about accountability rather than about learning and improvement. And that's unfortunate. In 2005, the world actually adopted what were called the Paris Agreements on international development aid. The United States, all the big donor countries, the international agencies all signed on, and they adopted a set of principles about how how international aid should be done and how it should be evaluated. Those principles call for the evaluation to be based on country priorities, for donors to collaborate in support of country priorities, and for there to be mutual accountability, not just one-way accountability. I think, and part of what I try to do is to bring those principles forward to remind people that that's what the world agreed to, even though they're not doing it. So principles-focused evaluation, one way to approach this, and I can give you the background references on the Paris Declaration on International Development Aid from 2005, and we did an evaluation in 2011 that won the Best Evaluation Award for that year, that looked at adherence to these principles. Is the development aid really based upon country priorities? Is there mutual accountability? Are the donors collaborating to support country priorities rather than donor priorities? And that the evaluation should make sense and be based upon those principles. So calling those forth as a part of the way that you engage with things like USAID should give you more freedom to do things that make sense rather than just follow their bureaucratic requirements.
Okay, thank you. I think the country like Mongolia, the recognizing the principle that the difficult things, you know.
Well, we will
Yeah,
support you in that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if someone is having a question, please raise your hand and I can see who is going to ask. But now no one's raised hand, but if someone has a question, then you can straight away ask now. Okay, while waiting, I can also ask my questions because I have 5 questions, but now 3 remains. So the third question I have is that like practical one, because you may know the UN United Nations PAGE program. This is called Partnership Action for Green Economy. It was implemented like 5-6 multiple countries, including Mongolia, and I think it spent almost like $165 million, and the impact is huge. I think like green economy transition, it was one of the biggest initiative from UN to implement green economy transition in that developing countries especially. And then I was kind of part of this page, and I did some work, and then there was evaluation task for page by external evaluators, and then one of the and the draft report of the evaluation just came to me quite recently, and then when I read this report, it was said that efficiency part of the evaluation was very little, and then there was no calculation of benefits in monetary terms. Normally, because I do some evaluation in cost benefit analysis and some NPV and IRR calculations, but in this report I didn't see anything. And I was wondering, like, is it because the project is too big and having too many activities, and it's maybe not feasible or not possible to calculate those benefits? And do you have some idea why it's not like that? It's not calculating the benefits?
It's another great question, and it is the problem of sometimes the evaluation resources aren't enough to do everything that needs to be done. That people can only do so much, or they don't have someone on the team who can deal with the cost benefit questions. the traditional ways in which efficiency has been handled actually turns out not to be very supportive of a green economy, because it simply looks at inputs and outputs. And one of the developments that I think is important in the area of cost benefit is what's called true cost accounting or full cost accounting, which means that for example, in traditional efficiency of agriculture, you look at the inputs, the fertilizer, the insecticides, the seeds, and then the yield, how much gets grown and what the yield is and the cost benefit of that. But full cost accounting, true cost accounting, looks at the effects on the land, looks on the effects on the soil, looks at the effects on the air, looks at the effects on human health, looks at the effects on the environment. And so a true cost accounting approach would truly be green in that it would ask questions about the costs and the benefits, not just in pure economic terms, but in societal terms, in cultural terms, in human terms, connecting the environment and human health in a full cost or true cost accounting. And there is now a movement from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food to spread true cost accounting. If you search on the web for true cost accounting, you'll find resources about how to do a more comprehensive approach to issues of efficiency instead of the very narrow traditional economic way of doing it, that it involves a broader, more systems perspective of what are the cost benefits of a system rather than a particular activity.
Yes, that's exactly true. But as an economist, when people say about economic analysis, it's not only the private, it's called private cost benefit analysis and social cost benefit analysis. Social means like all effects, including the environmental and social and economic effects, should be counted and calculated and valued to measure the true benefits and true costs. So that's really economics. But some people think that economics only the benefits to the private person or individual company. For example, this vaccination program or any building of hospitals or schools, it's not really private benefits and it's not really a profits of business. It's actually to make impact, to improve some of the situations, so that the person who is doing this efficiency analysis should actually account the all benefits, which is sometimes possible to be monetized, sometimes it's not possible to be monetized, but of course the person cannot calculate all the effects, but somehow the effects that can be possibly calculated.
Right. And from our perspective, a utilization-focused evaluation would do that collaboratively. That can't be done by an external evaluation team that just comes in and tries to make those calculations on outside the program. That's the kind of calculation that ought to be a part of the program itself and done collaboratively, where the evaluator is present as part of the program team, and that kind of evaluation is built in to the initiative, not separate from it, not on the outside, but is part of the work itself. The external people then validate that internal work, but that's not the kind of thing that can be done externally. It needs to be done internally by the project itself.
Okay. Okay, so I have one question on the chat by Nimbaya Sormajo. It's in Mongolian, so I will have to translate. It says, lots of monitoring is done for this project and things, but a little bit less evaluation has been done in Mongolia. So how can we solve this kind of problem that neglecting the evaluation but more doing the monitoring? And the question also continues that okay. Is there any country that you can tell us that they also do lots of good evaluation the country is having the same level of development as Mongolia. And the next question is that what should we do? What should Mongolians do for solving of this problem by your experience, as from your experience? And it says, okay, is there any country that they built a kind of evaluation culture in very short time? Is there any country that they did a very short time evaluation culture, developed evaluation culture? Almost like 4 questions.
I think that all the countries are struggling. The Scandinavian countries probably are the closest, both in terms of numbers of people and a more homogeneous country where they do a lot of evaluation and are especially focused on issues of sustainability, and their international aid tends to be true to the principles that were adopted for mutual assistance in international aid. The South Africa is really doing, probably as a developing country, the most in evaluation. They've got very strong evaluation approach that they've adopted nationally called the justice transitions, that's dealing both with issues of equity and sustainability. They've got all their universities collaborating. They have all the ministries collaborating. They've made evaluation a centerpiece of the work in South Africa. They're the best example I know of a developing country that's taking evaluation very seriously. They have an annual conference on evaluation that senior policymakers participate in. They do online training for people in evaluation. And again, talking about how to develop this in Mongolia, I think that what we've been emphasizing is drawing upon your own culture and history about things that have been learned in Mongolia out of your own history that reflect on evaluation messages. The story, for example, from my perspective, of the wolf and the muddy horse is a story about moving from monitoring to evaluation. The monitoring piece is simply gathering data. The evaluation piece is reflection. What does it mean? Why did it happen? And so in the story of the wolf and the muddy horse, we've got a story of moving from just monitoring what's going on to then reflecting. Why did this happen? What does it mean? That's really the transition from monitoring to evaluation, is taking the time to interpret the data, to figure out why it happened, to think about what it means. And that's a reflection process, so that you've got history of that in other arenas of being reflective, and drawing on that history of reflection is really how to incorporate evaluation into the culture.
Charmagne, I think you had some ideas.
I was just going to say too that, you know, given that the Mongolian Evaluation Association is just formed last year, right? That's a great step towards that, and that now you have a group of people who are committed to this and can help to move that forward. And so I think that you're on the right path, and making sure, as Michael said, that you're not trying to do what everyone else is doing, but you're forming your own way of doing it with, you know, founded in some of the principles that have come before. You're on the right path.
Okay, thank you. Just to link, the question is linked to the last one, because it's saying monitoring and evaluation. I think like when I was doing some jobs with United Nations at that time, 2014 around. At that time, it was like monitoring and evaluation was always like having it together as a kind of one meaning. But nowadays, it's more like evaluation, that you don't really talk so much about monitoring. Is it like evaluation stuff, or is it like already evaluation including the idea of monitoring all the time, or is it very much separate?
It's a great question. I do think that for the most part now we are subsuming monitoring within evaluation rather than treating them as separate, and that the more emphasis on actually making sense of the data, not just monitoring. Monitoring has become more of a management function, where the management of projects is to monitor what's going on. Management information systems is really where monitoring is. And so the profession of evaluation is more focused on making sense of the data, interpreting the data, looking at results, bringing systems perspectives to bear, and the monitoring is much more in the management side these days.
Okay, thank you. And also Charmagne said we are also seeing MEL means like monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So this
Right.
the third aspect is called learning, and it's not only monitoring, evaluation, it's also learning. Yeah, we do mainly development evaluation that it includes all three together inherently. So thank you, Charmagne. So anyone having another question, please raise your hand or you can ask directly. Okay, it seems like no questions, so I will just go to my next question if there's no one is ready
May
to.
I answer?
Oh, please, yes, please.
Okay, my name is Gerald Toya. I am a statistician, very technical person. So the evaluation is just my first. I really don't have background in evaluation, but I think that statistics contributes to evaluation much, because it just provides some quantitative methods of evaluation. So I am one of the board members and the chair of quantitative evaluation methods, TIG. So in my mind, when we talk about evaluation, we have to evaluate how the changes has occurred since the basis year up until this current year, or up until the current period. So I always think about in statistical terms when I think about evaluation. So we have this situation this year, and we will be reaching these numbers in 5 years, in 10 years time, etc. And then we have to do some evaluation in between during the 5 or 10 years, kind of, I would say, tracking the changes by doing evaluation on yearly basis, etc. So can I consider that some international organizations are developed what kind of SDG track, progress track platform? You see, would you consider that these platforms are the tools of evaluation? This is my first question. And secondly, I did work in many projects, mainly in statistical projects. But at the end of the project completion, we usually have, especially when I did work for the European countries for 3.5 years on a statistical project. So we have the external auditing. You see, the project completed in July, still we have to have some interview with the external auditing people. So auditing is a part of the evaluation. Evaluation is part of auditing, or they are completely different? These are the two questions. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you. On the first question, the way in which statistics, which are certainly very important, and quantitative data is very important for evaluation, it becomes evaluation when the data are interpreted and judgments are made. So that going back to monitoring, tracking the statistics, tracking the indicators is simply data. And until it's interpreted, and judgments are made about what it means, that's how it becomes evaluation. It's how do you make sense of the data? The American Statistical Association 3 years ago, in order to get people to be more thoughtful about interpreting data, actually banned the term statistically significant. They said that the term statistically significant should never be used in research, should never be used in evaluation, because people had become mechanistic and mechanical about simply looking at 0.05 level of significance or 0.01 level of significance and saying that made it significant without thinking about what it really means. And so they banned, outlawed, don't use the word statistically significant, and they substituted that with principles that say, for statistical analysis, accept ambiguity, sometimes the answers aren't clear, be thoughtful, be modest, and be open to different interpretations. So evaluation of statistical data involves thinking about what it means, placing it in a context, relating different statistics to each other to make sense of and render a judgment about what the numbers mean. They don't explain themselves. And that's the evaluation piece of that. On the auditing question, for the most part, auditing is a separate function in most ministries because it is more of a compliance activity than a learning or evaluation activity. Auditing tends to be focused on whether or not rules were followed, whether or not plans were followed, whether or not the money was used appropriately. And so auditors have a much narrower task than evaluators. There are places where they get mixed up together, but for the most part, auditors have a much narrower function to simply see if the money and the program were done according to what they were funded for. And that is usually a separate division of a ministry or an organization separate from the evaluation division.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. So I completely agree with you that statisticians, we usually avoid using very professional terminologies when we in communication with the public. For instance, as you say, this identify primary users. So we have to identify first who are our users. So confidentiality, statistical confidentiality should not be used in the public research articles or in public documents or reports. It will be confusing, of course, the public. So I agree with you completely. Thank you so much.
And this is why data visualization has become so important now.
Exactly.
Is that's the big movement, is not to present just the numbers, but to present the visuals. So there's a lot of work going on in data visualization. The biggest training sessions that go on these days and the biggest sessions at the evaluation conferences are all data visualization sessions. Every data visualization session is packed. The workshops are packed. Stephanie Evergreen is the world's leader in data visualization, and all of her stuff is oversubscribed. So translating from numbers into visualization for the ordinary people to understand and still be accurate is one of the major developments going on in the evolution of evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. Yeah, the data visualization is most important to give understanding to the public what's going on, to explain the statistical numbers in visual terms. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And is there anyone having other questions? So, Cimge, is there any time limit do we have?
Yes, let's ask the last question. Maybe one of our young evaluators, if they would like to voice out. Otherwise, we can now conclude. We already passed our time limit 1 hour, and it's been 1.5 hours. So maybe, Sor, are you here? Sor is our co-founder and co-leader of Graduate Mongolia chapter. And you are the last one to ask, and then we can conclude.
Yeah, I think so. So thanks for the presentation, of course. And it was very informative. And what I immediately thought was, I wasn't quite knowledgeable in terms of proverbs because I only managed to understand one of them, didn't know the rest of them. And the one thing that stood out to me was you cannot fit 2 saddles to 1 horse. And I mean, it's correct me if I'm wrong. I immediately thought that it kind of has something to do with using different approaches for an evaluation. And when I was translating an EPTET course, I encountered something that you have to, use different approaches, mix it together to make it more manageable, if I'm not wrong. So what's your take on this point?
Well, I appreciate your picking up on that, because there are 2 things that come up. If you're going to have more than one approach in the evaluation, then in terms of the proverb, you need more than 1 horse. So that to try to have 1 horse, like 1 evaluator, to do all the different approaches is going to overwhelm. As you talked about the evaluation group that didn't do efficiency, they needed another horse. They needed an efficiency horse to do that part. So, and part of the reason I like that proverb so much is there are, as I showed in the yin yang examples, to do an accountability evaluation and a learning evaluation in the same evaluation is very difficult, because accountability is actually asking the question, did you do what you were supposed to do, and did you accomplish what you were supposed to accomplish? And it's largely for external stakeholders, for funders, for policymakers. The evaluation is aimed at addressing their concern. But learning is really for internal improvement. Learning requires openness. It requires being able to acknowledge mistakes. It requires being able to talk about what went wrong. And when you're doing accountability evaluation, it's very scary to talk about what went wrong because you're afraid of being punished. You don't want policymakers and funders to know what the weaknesses are because you're afraid that they will not continue to support the program. So that's why there's conflict. And so you need to know, is the saddle and the horse an accountability horse? Is it a learning horse? And that those are separate processes that require riding in different ways and going in different places and doing different things. So it's not that you can't do more than one thing, but you need to be clear that different horses can do different things. And that I have in my very first creative evaluation book, my son was 8 years old, and I had him do an illustration for me about different kinds of horses. There are race horses, there are farming horses, there are horses for the circus, and he drew me a horse for each one of those. And I said, each one of those horses is a different kind of evaluation. They do different things. And so the being clear then about what the purpose of an evaluation is, and if you have multiple horses, multiple purposes, you're going to need more than one horse and more than one saddle. That's what I take from the proverb.
Thank you. And is there anyone?
Okay, so do you have any more question?
No, I only had one question. So
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so question and answer session is ended, I think, and then we can end our session and over to Chimge.
All right, thanks very much, Dr. Michael Quinn Patton and Ms. Charmagne again on behalf of the Mongolian Evaluation Association and all the people in Mongolia. And we learned a lot, and we traveled through the 50 years of evaluation history, and it's 1.5 hours, nothing. It's a very short time for us to learn from this hub of your knowledge. So we really hope that we can have another session. Sorry about that.
The young evaluator.
We can have another round of learning session before this year ends, maybe one more focused on one of your books, either Principle-Focused Evaluation, Blue Marble, or UFE. So again, I really much appreciate and thank you everyone for joining. And we will also post this recording on our channel so that more people can benefit from this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you.